Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teach campaign. We are going to start with a short public service announcement that introduces you to today's topic. And so please direct your attention to the screen. And send some love over to the tech people, please, as they get this started for us.
What do you think it would be like to teach? Chances are, you have no idea. Teachers today are breaking down obstacles, finding innovative ways to instill old lessons, proving that greatness can be found in everyday places, and that you don't need to be famous to be unforgettable. That's what it's like to teach.
So before we get started, I'd love to acknowledge the teachers in the room. If you are a classroom teacher, would you please stand for a second so we can acknowledge the great work that you do for our country's students? Thank you so much for standing. I, too, am a teacher from New York City. I teach 5th grade reading and am truly excited about today's topic, which is Teach.org and the Teach campaign, a very exciting campaign that seeks to recruit the next generation of teachers. The goals of the Teach campaign really are around thinking about 21st century learning and how we can create a grassroots movement to change negative perceptions of teaching and also create a hub where new teachers can go and seek out information on how to become a teacher and how to be a prepared teacher. The campaign seeks to do this through public service announcements like the PSA that you just saw that really seeks to rebrand teaching as a profession that takes motivated, creative individuals into classrooms where they can really share their expertise with students. Additionally, through college recruitment. So on colleges across the country, and we're going to take a look in a second at where the Teach campaign is beginning, there are grassroots community ambassadors that are working to really rebrand teaching and encourage high-achieving students to join the teaching profession with a particular focus on STEM careers, so that's also science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as people of color and males. And also really utilizing the specifics of each individual campus to rebrand teaching and message teaching as a viable career option. Can we move to the next? Great. So again, another portion of the Teach campaign is through social media. So Teach.org has a huge social media presence on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media websites where they're using their social media presence to launch events and to really send out motivating messages and information about the teaching profession. Teach is beginning in 4 markets around the country. So if you are in Atlanta, DC, Arizona, or the Bay Area, then there are a collection of college campuses that are working with Teach ambassadors in those particular markets. And the campuses range from public to private universities, smaller universities to large universities, and are really working with students to really spread the message about the importance of teaching, about the importance of really recruiting a diverse teacher pipeline to meet the demands of 21st century learning, and really looking to recruit teachers to serve as Teach ambassadors on these campuses to share their stories about the work that they do. So So I'd like to invite us all to follow Teach on Twitter and join conversations on social media about the importance of teaching. And also invite us to tweet during our panel discussion, where we will be talking about many of the issues on how to recruit the next generation of great teachers to the classroom. I'd like to first introduce our panelists. We have Genevieve DeBose, who is a teacher from Oakland, California, and also from New York City. She is now the Director of Education Engagement at the National Board, where she's responsible for mobilizing over 106,000 teachers around the country and energizing their efforts. So please give a round of applause to Genevieve. Thanks. We also have James Bernard. He is the Global Director and Strategic Education Partnerships Director at Microsoft. He runs a global team focused on building public-private partnerships to support innovative teaching and learning. So please give a warm welcome to James.
Thanks.
And last but certainly not least, we have a award-winning teacher from Casper, Wyoming, Mauro Diaz. Mauro teaches 8th grade life science and originally started his teaching career in New York City. Please give a warm, warm welcome to Mauro Diaz. Jeff Johnson is unable to join us today, and I will be moderating the conversation around teach.org. So let's get started.
Awesome.
All right. So can you all take a second to just tell us why teach.org? Why are you invested in this campaign? Why is this work important to you?
Sure, I can start.
All right.
I'm, number one, really excited to be here, so thank you. I'm invested in Teach for a number of reasons, but I'll just share two. One is that I love my profession. I love what I do. I love teaching. There's no other professional experience I've had that has brought me as much joy as teaching does and has allowed me to have such a huge impact on the lives of others. And so I love what I do, and I want to help recruit the next generation of teachers. And then the second piece is I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to LA Unified School District schools my entire life. And I had very few teachers of color. And this is in Los Angeles. And I'm a very ethnically and racially diverse place, but my teachers didn't necessarily represent that. And so I want to also, because of the focus on recruiting teachers of color, I want to also invest in that, because I know how important it is for students to be represented, see themselves in their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually fairly humbled to be here on stage as the only non-teacher, non-practicing teacher on stage. And I come from a background where both my parents are teachers, and I grew up in a teaching environment, but that certainly doesn't give me the credibility or the skills to understand what it really means to stand in front of a classroom. I got involved in education a few years ago at Microsoft, and through our global efforts where we work with innovative teachers in about 130 countries, and realized just how much great innovation is happening out there in the classroom today, where technology can play a role with that, and how important teacher training and school leadership is to support good teaching and learning in the classroom. So when we had the opportunity to get involved in the Teach campaign as a company, it made a lot of sense, especially given the STEM focus and the importance of investing in STEM teachers to inspire the next generation of learners who may start some of the startups that we're seeing here at South by Southwest this week. So we see it as not just a PR program or a corporate social responsibility program, but really this is a business imperative for us and a social imperative for us as a company to make sure that the right teachers are coming into the system, to make sure that they understand how to inspire kids, to make sure that that generation of students are coming in to have the right skills to be hireable by Microsoft, to be hireable by our partners, by our competitors around the world, because they're going to be the next generation of entrepreneurs who create the next generation of great tech companies, and some of them will be tech companies that work in education. So this is a great campaign. We're very excited to be a part of it and look forward to the discussion.
So I'm also honored to be here also. And I think I also have a couple of reasons, kind of like Genevieve. Just my own personal experience and my own education background. I think being born in Mexico and coming to the United States, and how important it was to have those teachers that not only taught me, all this math and science, those kind of things, but they taught me a new language. And I think that learning that new language, learning English, was really the milestone for me. And I remember specifically almost kind of sort of bridging the two languages and how it opened up a world for me. And so that's really why I'm invested in this campaign, Teach campaign. But also, I also know that teachers make a huge impact on students. And the other part is that my own kind of transition, I worked in business for about 7 years after college, and I wanted to transition to teaching. And it was the most difficult thing I remember just thinking, oh, I'll just go into teaching. It wasn't that easy. And so I actually moved from Wyoming to New York City to do the New York City Teaching Fellows, because that was really for me, that was an alternative way of doing it that was made sense. I was going to be in the classroom. I was going to be with students. But also it was very, very tough. It was a tough time. And so that's why I think this Teach campaign can enlighten kids and people that are going through college, even high school, the avenues of how to become a teacher. So.
Excellent. So audience members, can you raise your hand if you heard of teach.org before 10 minutes ago? You have visited the site and you've heard of it. Okay. So about half. So good. Some people may have a little bit more context than others. Can you all speak to how teach.org and resources on the website can be used as a way to transition to teaching and to learn about different avenues for entering the teaching profession?
I think if I can answer that, I think I know when I remember looking at, I decided I'd become a teacher, there really wasn't a resource to go find something to teach you, to tell you where to go. And so I think that's what the website kind of adds. You can go to any state and see what the teaching requirements are, if there's alternative certifications, schools that are, so it really provides kind of in one place, it provides all the information you need if you were going to transition into teaching. But also, not only that, but it provides videos if you're thinking about teaching and you go there, just like what you just saw with the teacher, I think there's a lot of inspiration that you can draw from. If you're in that bubble, if you're thinking about teaching, it can provide a lot of good information.
I think, as was mentioned at the beginning, we're also looking, we're starting to work on a campaign on 20 campuses right now to recruit students to become teachers, and we're looking for existing, practicing teachers to become teach ambassadors to help on that grassroots recruitment effort. And this year is really kind of a pilot program, the first 20 campuses in 4 cities, and we're planning to expand that over time. And I should mention this is a partnership between the Department of Education, Microsoft, and State Farm, and we're also in the process of recruiting and looking for other private and social sector partners to come in. We have a number of associations on board will be helping with this effort as well. So there'll be a lot more information coming. This has really just been the kickoff year for this campaign, and it's really important to be able to promote and to change the discussion about what teaching is, and to inspire people to understand that teaching is not just a social investment, it's a career, it can be a lifelong career, and teachers who come out of the classroom and are in the classroom have a set of skills that are incredibly important and are hireable by companies down the road. Working in an education team at Microsoft, I think I work with mostly ex-teachers, and they bring a great skill set into the private sector when they decide to leave teaching, including the ability to manage chaos, the ability to take really complex data and simplify it, and to be able to manage really big projects. And so we're looking to ensure that those teachers are coming into the profession, but if teachers are looking to exit the profession, we want a huge base of teachers who are also supporting teachers in other ways throughout their careers.
Right. Yeah. So Mauro and James, you both spoke about really messaging the joy of teaching, right? So we know that there are a lot of challenges for teachers around the country right now. What are some ways that folks in the audience and just the greater education community, what are ways that we can spread the importance of teaching and the joys of teaching, as you spoke of, Mauro? not only within the education community, but thinking about grandparents, thinking about parents, thinking about college counselors.
Yeah, and one thing that we do, because I teach at D. Morgan Middle School in Casper, Wyoming, and one thing that we do is, as the kids are leaving us, I teach 8th grade, and so they're going to go on to high school, and right now we're actually in the middle of planning. They have a sort of a career day we do, and so what we've transitioned that career day. So before we'd always have physicians and firemen and game and fish and come into the classrooms and kind of do a presentation. But we've kind of flipped it a little bit where we had the kids go and interview, go to the field and spend some time, and then they come back, and those kids actually do the career day themselves, and they take on the role of the game and fish or the physician. And what they, and we've also, since I've been there, there was never a teacher that was presenting as a career. It was always someone else. And so we also did that. And I think when the kids, they brought a lot of information, but when they interviewed the teacher and lived with the teacher and saw their role, and when they spoke to other kids about teaching, it was really kind of profound, because they said, I never realized how teaching could be so fun. But make sure that you have, and so their big take is, behave, because this actually could be a lot of fun if you behave, just seeing it from their perspective. So I think getting kids involved in that message, because I think they're the direct result of the profession. And I think getting them involved is important. I think parents also, parents want to be involved. And I think if you're going to become a messenger, I think parents are the biggest messengers of the profession. They provide a lot of good feedback and input into what the joys are, because they're the ones that really appreciate it.
I think it's important for us as a campaign and for others who are in teaching to really understand some of the data and sort of the statistics that are out there about teaching, and the fact that we see about half the teachers in the U.S. will be retiring in the next 10 years. And so there's a huge opportunity for the future for this to be a growing profession, for this to be a profession where there will be jobs for kids, and for those jobs to have a real impact on society and the economy going forward. There's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a statistic that there will be a 267% growth in unfilled jobs because of unskilled labor in the technology industry over the next 5 years. So there's a huge need for good teachers to come in and teach kids those STEM skills to be able to fill those jobs. And so it's not just going in and teaching in the classroom for the sake of teaching, but it fills a larger societal role in driving economic growth over time and helping parents understand that it's not just a social investment. It's a career, and it has a long-term effect not just on the individuals in the classroom, but on the society as a whole.
I want to add something to that, which is it makes me think a lot about how we talk about our profession as teachers. And it wasn't until I became engaged in teach.org and started participating and learn more about it that I realized, oh, my family and my very close friends know that I love teaching and know that I love what I do. But beyond that, people don't know. I don't talk about it enough in that way. And so it made me think a lot about how do I share what I do every single day and encourage others to do it. And it made me think differently about my students. So we have family conferences, and I don't highlight, I highlight strengths and areas for growth for students, and they do that for themselves. But I may say, you're incredibly strong at collaborating with others and working in groups. That's a skill that you need as a teacher. You should consider being a teacher. I can tell my middle schoolers that, or you're really good at taking information and explain, like really complex information, and explaining it to your peers. That's a skill that teachers use, or you're incredibly creative. And so thinking about how I didn't think before I became actually involved in Teach how I can target what I do and bring that out in my students. And then the other piece I'll share is, I think as teachers, there's over 4 million of us in the country. We're all part of some kind of network, right? Whether that's we're involved in our union, or we're involved in a policy group, or a professional content-based organization. I'm a national board certified teacher, so is Mauro. There are 106,000 of us across the country. That's a network that we belong to. So how do I engage other people in my networks and spread the word so that we do have national board certified teachers in those 4 areas who are going to be the Teach ambassadors and are willing to talk with college students in Atlanta or in the San Francisco Bay Area about what they do. So I think tapping into our networks is a huge piece of that as well.
And so I'm hearing strategies for messaging to students. What about parents or community members that can also be an influencer in encouraging a student to become a teacher or not? What are some ways that teachers and other folks in the room can really message the importance of teaching and why it's a great career?
You know, one thing that I had this opportunity, when I became a national board certified teacher, I had the opportunity to participate in a discussion at the White House about effective teaching in our current system of education. And being from Wyoming, those issues, Wyoming has its own sort of opportunities and issues. But when being at the White House, I don't think that was sort of the main kind of focus. And so, but I remember going back to Wyoming, and I had my own, I kind of had sort of did this a conference with teachers, and I invited 45 teachers, and you know, invited everyone I could in the state. And what turns out is that we wrote a white paper, and then we presented, and so we presented to business people, and I've been talking to legislators, and I think when that happens, when you go, it doesn't have to be a specific message, but when you go and talk to the business people and tell them what you're doing, what you think would improve education and for, what improve the environment for kids, for teaching, they really respond to that, and it's really a collaboration between them, and they become very engaged in the discussion, and so I think taking leadership, and I think that really helps, I think, broaden the discussion. And so I think then those people, those business people, and especially legislators, I think when they come visit your classroom, because that's always invite them to come to my classroom, they always talk in positive terms about about education. And so I think it's a good way to message the importance of education, and just them seeing what you do in the classroom gets them excited about education. So
just about every successful legislator or policymaker or professional has been touched by a teacher at some point in their past, and they can remember that person. So when teachers connect with those kinds of audiences in a way that makes them remember why they got into whatever they're doing, that's a very powerful message. I know we work with schools all over the world. We have about 6,000 innovative schools around the world we work with. And school leaders, the successful school leaders often work out in the community, sort of beyond just the school community, but with local business leaders and legislators and policymakers. And so getting that message out there in that way, as Mauro says, is a very important role that teachers can play, because all of those people are parents within the school system, and they have connections to other places. So I mean, it really is a positive web of connections that we have in different communities.
So audience members, we are going to take a few questions. So if you have a burning question that you'd like to ask our panelists, feel free to line up in front of the mic that will be coming towards the center of the room. And panelists, I just want to talk more about why this work is important, and Teach has an explicit focus on really looking at students who are interested in science, technology, engineering, and math, males and people of color. Why would that be important? Why are those issues critical looking forward to the next generation of teachers?
I mentioned, if I may just take the question on the STEM side of it. I mean, I mentioned earlier the importance of STEM and why we're involved in STEM education, the importance of making computer science sort of an accessible career choice for children. That only comes when you have teachers who can inspire children that computer science, for example, or any STEM career is a viable career. And so we need teachers who've worked in that space, who are studying in that space, to consider, or people in university to consider becoming teachers. And we know that when those things happen and people go into STEM careers, then new technologies come out, new innovations come out. So it's a very important program for us. And this relates to a much larger initiative we have at Microsoft around STEM education. We have a program called DigiGirls, which helps girls get into STEM education in a number of states across the country. Imagine Cup is a global competition for STEM students, both high school and higher education, which brings about 300,000 competitors together in a global competition for new technologies. And then we have a finals that is happening in Seattle later on this year. So there are a lot of ways we invest in STEM education, and the only way to make STEM education successful is to ensure that the right teachers are there being able to teach STEM education. So we have a vested in business interest, as I said earlier, to make sure that STEM education is growing in this country.
I'll add something to that specific to teachers of color, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. And I think a lot about school and what the purpose of school is. And as Mauro mentioned earlier, yes, the purpose is for students to learn, academic content and the skills they need to survive in the real world. But a huge purpose for me as a teacher is to create a space where my students feel safe, create a space where they can take those risks so they can learn, and to do so in a way where everyone is welcome. And for me as a student, like I said, growing up, I didn't realize it because I didn't have the language to articulate what I was experiencing, and it wasn't until I became a teacher myself that I realized not seeing people who looked like me beyond elementary school, really, in front of the classroom, really had an impact on my own academic achievement, how comfortable I felt speaking in front of a classroom, raising my hand, taking a risk, sharing an idea. And something that may seem very simple is incredibly powerful when we think about that 40% of our kids in this country are students of color, but only 15% of our teaching force are African American and Latino. And so what does that say to the students that may look like me in the classroom? And so for me, it's just incredibly important when we think about educating all of our children, and when we have this passion for really investing in all of our children, we have to invest in the teachers who are going to help facilitate learning for those students. And the more teachers of color that we can get, the more students, my students who are all Black and brown students, the more I can encourage them and support them so that they can be wonderful teachers, is going to be incredibly powerful moving forward.
I think recruiting Latinos and African American teachers, it's not a new thing. I mean, I remember in the late 80s, I think the Ford Foundation, the DeWitt Foundation, they had this huge effort to recruit these teachers of color. And it turned out they were really successful. The rate of Latinos and African Americans, especially men, went really, it just skyrocketed. But the problem, so that was the positive side. The negative part was the retention rate. And predominantly, like my experience, I went and taught in the Bronx. And so most of people of color go teach in inner city schools or high poverty schools. And so the work environment is not perfect. Yeah. And so I know, like in my experience, I remember seeing my mother work really hard, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to go down that road. And so, because she didn't have a lot of autonomy, and it was just not a lot of decision making in her job. And so I remember thinking, and going into teaching, I remember being in the Bronx and sort of almost being in the same situation my mom was. There wasn't a lot of autonomy or input on how the school would be run. And I think that was, and I saw it all around me, teachers leaving because of that reason. And so I think in some sense, I think this next generation of teachers, I think can help change that dynamic. They can, because I think they come up with certain skills that I think are valuable for business, but also could transform the profession just by their attitude and the skills that they bring. And so I think that's, I think this Teach campaign, I think, will continue to recruit, and I think that's a really positive thing. But I think it also has the potential to also transform the way we organize our schools and how we respect our teachers. And so I think it's really important.
I think one of the hopes is that some of the innovative teachers coming into the program and starting to teach now become school leaders of the future as well, and they see a different way of being able to manage schools. And it's really incredible around the world to see how school leaders make such a huge difference, not just in their school community. A good school that's run with a good strategy and a strong leader is very different than a school down the road that has a weak leader. But they also influence up into the education system, and whether that's at the district level or the national level, good, and many of the new principals coming up into the system are former teachers. And so how do we get those teachers who are most innovative to become the next principals of the future to spur more innovation in the schools?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Genevieve mentioned having a welcoming environment, and I hope all of our audience members feel welcomed to ask a question of our panelists, and that you feel motivated and inspired by the conversation. So again, feel free to go to the center of the room to ask your question using that microphone.
You can hear me.
Well, we have folks in the back that want to hear your question as well.
I just had a question of Genevieve. You spoke about being in the school system with no teacher of color that you had during your entire career as a student. What could a teacher that's not of color do to eliminate the missing part that you felt like you had?
Great, and that's a great question. Just to clarify, I did have teachers of color, but mainly in elementary school, and as I went to middle school and high school, I had less. So I think that is a wonderful question, because majority of our teachers in the United States are white women. How do we, and our student body, like I said before, is 40% students of color, so what can folks do? So I think going back to that welcoming environment, one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a teacher in any environment, and I've taught in Los Angeles, in Watts, I've taught in Oakland, California, and most recently, like Mauro in the South Bronx, in New York City. And so it's incredibly important to come in from a place of humility, wherever you teach, right? That you come in as a learner. And so I do home visits. I go and I reach out to families and I say, hey, you know, I'm interested in learning more about you and your family. Would you be willing, is it okay if I come over? And if they're not comfortable with that, then we can do it some other place. But I've never had a family turn me away from a home visit. And it gives me a space to, I'm on their terms, I'm on their turf, and they get to show me, you know, I have a student either show me one of their favorite things, or we just have a conversation. Creating a sense of trust, I think, is incredibly important. When my students saw Miss DeBose came to my house, did Miss DeBose go to your apartment yet? Oh yeah, she came to my apartment. We had this, we did that, you know. That's really important. I know where my kids go home, so I know what that looks like. So I think reaching out to families is really key, but I think also creating a classroom space that represents your kids. So making sure that I was a middle school language arts and social studies teacher, making sure that my classroom library represents my students, that they can find themselves in my library, making sure that the content we do is relevant to their lives and they can apply what they're learning to their everyday experience. So, and asking my kids and my families, I think one of the worst things we do in education is we come up with the ideas and the answers and we implement them on other people. Well, why don't I ask my students, you know, I'm a white woman, let's just say, for example. I'm a white woman, you know, I may not know. I've had students from Laos. I don't have any experience in Laos with Laotian culture, so I would learn from them. And so I think just allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and humble is key, and then also asking families, figuring out how do you communicate. And I'll just say, since I said Laos, I had one of my students, Karen, her family in Oakland. There's a large Southeast Asian population in Oakland, California, and her mom, Lou, would come to my classroom every day after school, and she would just be there for like 20 minutes. And I'd start to make conversation with her, and we'd talk a little bit, but she just wanted to be in the space. And it was really interesting because that's not how I communicate, but that's how she communicated. And her being present, just sharing space, helped me kind of expand my mind of what it means to be engaged and how to engage with people. And so, so those are a couple of ideas.
Just add two things really quickly. One is, I think technology gives you a really wonderful opportunity to use that content that's relevant in students' lives. And we have an opportunity now with so much more content out there to be able to connect in different ways that we didn't have in the past. And I love the idea of the humility and the sort of sitting down sort of face-to-face with the family, because collaboration and connection is a core 21st century skills. So that demonstrates, you know, a way to sort of connect with students in a different way.
Absolutely. I think that also technology is great, but we also have to make sure that parents have access to the technology so that we're not also shutting the doors to certain groups of parents.
I agree 100%.
Right.
So just to kind of what Genevieve said, I remember going through school and I remember having teachers come to my house and just finding out what the situation was at home, not to be probing, but I remember just coming to the house and asking my mom, questions. And I remember this specific one teacher, Ms. Maddox, she helped my mom get her GED. And she also, just in me, take an interest in my skills in math and my interest in science. And I think just knowing what the family situation was, that was just really powerful. And she still, even till now, she gets tamales for Christmas every year. And so it's a very, very powerful. You can have a huge influence on families if you take interest in them.
Absolutely. Take our next question.
Sure. Hi, I just wanted to thank you for your insights into the teaching profession. My name is Brandon Espinosa. I live in the Bronx. And I run a local.
Nice.
BX.
Yeah,
I run a local. I graduated from Cornell, and my colleague and I decided to start a nonprofit serving economically disadvantaged youth in the summer learning space. And simultaneously, we've created an internship for college students to get exposure to teaching prior to joining TFA, New York City Teaching Fellows, and other organizations. So my question for you is, what needs to change, if anything, around the teaching profession to make it more attractive, and so that we don't have high rates of turnover, and so that people aren't leaving for the private sector?
I think the
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And I think it is having to do with the environment, the teaching environment in the school, and not necessarily the students. It's always the autonomy to do what you're good at. And that also being able to participate in the direction of the school, and not in a kind of where the decision's already made and they get to your 2 cents. But what I've found is that we can't wait for that. We can't wait for that transition to happen or someone to make that transition. And so in my case, I feel like I'm pushing and I'm creating tables so we can have discussions at our state, in the state of Wyoming, in Casper, and then presenting those solutions to our school board members, to legislators. And so it's always solution-based, but I think that's where teachers need to sort of go outside of the classroom, create places where we can have discussions and bring it back and sort of almost take the profession ourselves. And not until that happens, we can't wait for someone to sort of do it for us. And so as teachers, I think that's where, and I know that it's tough work, but it's also very inspiring because people listen.
Mm-hmm. I'll add, I think number one, there are a million things that that can be improved to improve the teaching profession, but I'll just pick two. The two, I think a lot about my sister. My sister's a doctor. She's a gastroenterologist. And she went to 4 years of undergraduate school. She went to 4 years of medical school. She did a 3-year residency and then a 1-year fellowship. She passed her board exams, and then after that, only after that was she able to be an independent practitioner, right? When I think about teaching, I think about teacher training, and I think about how varied teacher training is in our country, and how what's alternative certification or traditional certification route, you don't have that type of experience, right? So I would have loved, as a teacher, to have been placed in a residency. Place me with a master teacher, place me with a national board certified teacher for a year so I can learn what it looks like, right? So I can learn, so I can talk to that person one-on-one. Let me do rounds with my colleagues, like medical students do rounds. Let's come and talk about Joy Sell, the student who's really struggling as a 6th grader with reading. So what's happening in her adolescent mind that's not allowing her to access the text on the page? Can I talk to my 3 colleagues here about that? We don't do that in teaching. So I think a lot about teacher training as an area that needs to improve, but then I also think about a career trajectory for me as a teacher. I talked to a teacher in Oakland who was a 30-year veteran who said, my job description is exactly the same today as it was as a first-year teacher. There's something wrong with that. And that is so true. So for me as a teacher who's been in the classroom for over a decade, it should be expected that I'm a new teacher, I'm a novice, I'm novice, and then I'm a developing teacher, and then once I achieve national board certification and pass my board exams, then I'm an accomplished teacher, and then there should be an opportunity for me to lead without necessarily having to leave the classroom, but maybe I'm in a role where I'm mentoring new teachers 50% of the time and teaching 50% of the time. Or maybe I'm really good at community engagement, and I need that in Hunts Point in the Bronx. I need to be engaged with my community. So maybe I have that opportunity. So there's no trajectory for teachers. You're in there, and just like Mauro shared, it's like, here's your keys and good luck. Right? So, and it varies so much based on where you're placed and who your principal is, and it shouldn't be so much of a gamble. I think there are lots of things that structures that need to be fixed.
I contrast that to working in the private sector where you have a career path and you have, your job changes over time, particularly in technology where you're doing a different job every few years. And that's encouraged, and it helps you grow and it helps you think differently. And I'd love to see that in the teaching profession as well.
Absolutely. Next question.
Hello, my name's Lynn. I've been an independent school teacher for about 11 years, and I often have friends kind of look at me with envy when I'm approaching summer holidays and winter break and things like that. And they're like, gosh, I would really love to get into teaching. What do you think? What do you think? And I always have to remind them that to be really successful, you need to love kids. It's not just loving English or loving math. And they look at me kind of confusedly, and I try to go into the emotional demands of the job. And I can never quite hit the right tone. And so I was wondering if you could offer some insight into how to talk to potentially interested novice teachers about the emotional demands of the job and what to expect in a realistic way, rewards and challenges.
I think the thing that because I kind of run into that with friends or even just, as I had mentioned earlier, reaching out to business people and whose kids are going through school, and they think their kids have a knack for teaching. And so the thing that I always do is invite them to my classroom, the parent and the child, and just spend a day with me. So I open my classroom all the time to potential, even kids that I've taught and they're now at the community college and they don't know where they're going. They just quite haven't figured out what direction they're going. So I just say, hey, I know you're not interested in teaching, but you should come to my classroom and just come hang out. And so I think that's a really powerful tool, just to see you in practice. And they do get a sense of the emotional toll it takes. They do.
Just my third year of teaching was in Oakland, California, and my dad is a university professor. He's a sociology professor in Los Angeles. And he came to visit me for 2 days. He decided he was going to be with me for 2 days, and I was like, great, you're coming to school. Yeah. He had never, even though my mother is a former teacher, so his wife was a teacher, but he had never been in a classroom for 2 days, a middle school, sixth grade classroom. After those 2 days, number one, like at the end of the day, he was in my library, exhausted, my library, the most comfortable chair in our classroom, and he said to me, Genevieve, I had no idea what you do every day. I could never do what you do, and my level of respect for you and for the teaching profession has just grown tremendously. And that was incredibly powerful for him. When we think about it as teachers, we do this every day. We know it's incredibly hard work, but having someone come and see it themselves and see all of the chaos you deal with every day can be very powerful. So I just echo what Mauro said in terms of bringing people in. I'm still thinking, I think your question is actually a really hard one for me. How do we convey that message about the emotional challenges of teaching? Because oftentimes people, I think, are just like, oh, you get summers off, you're done at 3. And I don't want to be the person that's like, no, but you don't know how hard it is when Raphael did this or when this happened. I don't want to be that person, but I think that's a good question. How do we convey that?
Yeah. So it makes me think, I was fortunate to see a panel discussion with a number of experts on STEM recently. And David Johns from the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for African Americans said, teaching isn't rocket science, it's harder. And the speaker that came after him, who's an advisor on science and technology for President Barack Obama, got up and he said, and actually, I am a rocket scientist, and I've also been teaching for the last 10 years before my position with President Obama. And so I can definitively say that it is a lot harder than rocket science. I am a rocket scientist, right? So I think that as teachers, we need to be extremely honest about the challenges, the emotional challenges, and the challenges that we face on a number of levels, the broken systems that Genevieve talked about, the emotional challenges. But I think we also need to round out the messaging with also the impact that we have on students. So I think about recently a student who contacted me that I worked with last year named Jose. And Jose came to me from Mexico and had a very challenging situation where he was living with extended family. And Jose and I worked incredibly hard during our year together to learn English. I taught bilingual education and worked with Jose for hours and hours after school to really catch him up on not only English language skills and Spanish language skills, but also just on him getting comfortable and being in the American school system. And there was a huge emotional toll tied to the work I did with Jose. There was a huge challenge instructionally on him and the number of other students that I had that were either new to the United States or had a number of challenges that they were dealing with. So I want to be honest about those challenges, but I also want to then round it off with saying, right now, Jose sent me a letter about a month ago saying how many books he's read this year so far and how many reading levels he's grown and thanking me for the work that I did with him and for not giving up. So I think that we have to also balance it with messaging that Teach uses the term make more, hashtag make more, that I know you all are flooding Twitter with right now. But that we do make more despite these challenges and that we do really push our students to new levels and really making sure the message is clear on the great work that we do. We'll move on to the next question unless, okay, take it away.
All right, thank you. My name is Jeremy Harden, and I'm a former teacher in Dallas Independent School District for 10 years, fifth and 6th grade math and science. Kind of like a follow-up question on two folds. One, with the struggles that teachers have, like from being a teacher, I understand. It is the hardest job. So question one, how can we make the job of teaching easier? How can we alleviate some of the pressures that teachers have? And two, with the reality of No Child Left Behind, is there any policy that's going to make teaching easier?
Great question.
Tough question.
I'll jump in. Jeremy, is that right? Yeah. Okay, so Jeremy, how do we make teaching easier? I'm gonna give a direct, like applicable right now example, and then I think the policy, there's, that's a really huge question. So one of the things about teaching is teaching can be incredibly isolating, right? You close your door, you're in your classroom, and depending on what kind of school you're in and what your colleagues in the school administration is like, you may not see another adult till 3 o'clock that day. And so one of the things that I think makes teaching easier is getting into each other's classrooms. And so I've been at schools where we weren't seeing each other, and so we decided as a group of teachers to say, hey, on your prep period, can you spend 30 minutes in my classroom and just watch me and tell me what you think? We don't need to use a rubric or anything, just tell me what you notice, so I could have another pair of eyes. That made my job easier because somebody else was seeing what I wasn't seeing. And then I would go to their class, and anytime I'm in a teacher's class, I learn something, right? Whether it's something I want to do or something I don't want to do. But usually it's something I want to do. And so I'd pull those gems from my colleagues. So that's something I think that makes teaching easier now. If the structure's not set up, we set it up ourselves. I'll just refer to my previous answer around the structures that go with teaching and teacher training and career trajectory for teachers as the larger big picture pieces. But I would also say in terms of policy, if there's a session today at 3 o'clock I think at 3 o'clock, called Respect Teaching, and it's led by Brad Jupp, a former teacher who works at the U.S. Department of Education, which is an entire basically mindset shift around what teaching should look like and how we professionalize teaching. And so when I think about policy, I think about a session like that and would encourage people to go because number one, Brad's awesome and dynamic, but number two, that's what I want as a teacher. That's what I want my career to look like.
It's interesting that the idea of connecting with other teachers in the classroom, this is something we see in the U.S. and we certainly see in lots of other countries. And next week we're hosting an event in Barcelona for 1,100 innovative teachers and school leaders from around the world. And the number one thing that they say that they get out of that event, but also local events that build up to that event, is the ability to connect with other teachers and to understand what other teachers are doing in their classrooms. Because often the most innovative teacher in a school is an island within that school and they don't even know how to pass that on. It doesn't have to be a highly formalized professional development program, although that would be really good, and there are many good programs out there like that, but it can be informal, as Genevieve says. And also, if teachers want to connect with other teachers who are doing interesting things, we run a network called the Partners in Learning Network, which is about 1 million teachers around the world. It's somewhat technology focused, but it's also how do I better use technology in my classroom to teach social studies, or how do I use Skype to connect with other classrooms. So I'd encourage people to go look at that resource and connect with teachers, and for teachers to find ways to connect with other teachers in their own school and outside of their school. And that kind of peer mentoring we see as a huge, or just sort of peer reviewing, is a huge benefit that teachers we work with around the world say they need. I won't touch the policy question. That one's a long answer.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, so I think that I would support everything that's been said. I think that the collaboration is, when you do work in isolation, it does seem like you're carrying a big burden. Like that you're carrying the weight of all these children on your shoulders. But when you do collaborate, then it just feels less and less. And the more you do it, and the better you get at collaborating, because collaborating is easy to say, but when you do it, it's not as easy. But when you get good at it, then you realize how you share that sort of that weight that you have. You share it among your teachers and other people around the country, and you hear great ideas. I think that's something that helps a lot. I think in terms of the policy, I've learned from just my experience in the state of Wyoming is that just having discussions with your principal, your superintendent, spend some time for them, and just telling them what you're experiencing in your classroom. And I think, Jeremy, if you share those stories with business people, because their kids are going to be in your classroom, and they want you to be in a great environment, so their children are in a great environment. And so I think, and I've had business people that I've talked to, they called the principal, and they said they're interested in the school. And so I think just having those conversations, I think, is important. It's a little uncomfortable, but you get used to it, and then you start seeing the effects of your conversations because everyone realizes it's not just we're being held accountable by everyone. It's not just numbers anymore, but it's actually people that are interested in what's going on in our school. So I would suggest that.
We'll take one more question.
Hi, my name's Elise Stewart, and I'm from a Jesuit school in Dallas. Dallas. Oh, thank you. And I am so heartened by the fact that you all are people who are behind this organization. It really makes me happy. I have a question that, this is my 21st year teaching in an all-boys school, and awesome. I have brilliant, beautiful students, and no one could ever compensate me monetarily for the things that I have had in my experiences, and now my oldest son is at the school. So this is all very real to me. I'm asking a question that sounds crass and pragmatic, but I mean it completely out of love. When I have students who are brilliant, and they could be great technology people or great scientists or great mathematicians that could discover something that I'm too, feeble-minded to even imagine, I wonder how I can, what is the language that you would help me to use to say to them, I want you to forgo that part of your career, and I want you to come to teaching, where not only you'll get great compensation emotionally and spiritually, but you will not necessarily get great compensation monetarily. And there's a place where I'm very torn because I am asking my future to make a choice between something that, I'm not asking them to make a choice between being, you know, outrageously wealthy, but where some people cannot make the choice to make the choices I have made. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say about, you know, being honest about that part of the discussion.
Can we have one panelist answer for this one?
Go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
So I would say that yeah, I don't know if you're ever going to convince someone to forego something, but what I would say is that if that person pursues and becomes a rocket scientist, if you can instill in them the value of the education they got and how they can, as they continue in their profession, how do you get them to think about that everything that they do in their lives, they do it with students in mind. Even though they're, you know, how do they get students involved in their profession? And how do they get them to have them come to their workplace and see what they do? And I think, because I struggle with that too. I struggle with that with kids coming to me, asking me when they're going out to college, and they want to major in neuroscience, and I'm trying to convince them to be teachers. It's a tough thing, but one thing I just do tell them is that please keep teaching in mind in terms of when you go out and you're the neuroscience, can you make sure you involve, go to schools, talk to kids, and I think that's, because I'm not sure if that's, I've changed a couple of kids' minds, but just a couple in a lot of kids that have gone through my classroom.
People can become lifelong disciples of teaching no matter what they do.
Thank you, yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I know I wasn't supposed to answer that, but I couldn't help it.
We'll have to take a sticker off of your chart or something like that. I'd just like to remind us all, again, to visit teach.org for resources, again, and if you know 18 to 25-year-olds that would love to become teachers, feel free to direct them to teach.org where they can find out where grants are and how they can be financially supported to transition to teaching, as well as search for jobs and positions across the country in order to join the teaching profession, and also look at certification requirements and how they can be supported through that process. And I've also mentioned Twitter and Facebook using the hashtag #MakeMore and following the handle teach.org. So just to close out, we know that teachers make all other professions possible. And I would like you, just briefly, if you have a story of a teacher that had a deep impact on your life, if you could just leave us with that. Maura, you mentioned a little bit earlier a teacher who had a profound impact on you. So James, let's start with you.
I'll try not to get emotional as I talk about this because he died a few years ago. But I had a teacher in high school at Lawrence Academy in Groton, Massachusetts, named Dr. Richardson. And he was the first teacher who took me outside the classroom and showed me that you could learn in all kinds of different ways and invested in me.
Absolutely. Genevieve.
I'm going to answer this question in a kind of out-of-the-box way based on the last question that was just asked. But my teacher is a student named Raphael, and Raphael was one of my students. I had my first year teaching in the Bronx, and before the school year started, our principal and assistant principal brought in his mom and me and had a conversation and said, if your child gets in trouble and you cannot pick him up from school, we are calling the police. And I was blown away by that because I said, this is an 11-year-old kid. He had had a really tough year the year before. He came to school 3 weeks late. He was in his home country. He came back. I had heard so much about Raphael, and he was hands down one of the most fabulous young people I have ever taught, because he was very much out of the box and was someone who did not, I could see why many teachers struggled with him. But I invested in him, we had this incredible bond, and it wasn't until 5 years later when I was at my same school and one of our lunch aides came and said, Mr. Bose, someone's here to see you. And I said, who? And here comes Raphael. He was this chubby, short kid in 6th grade. He was this tall, kind of thinned out young man, 11th grader. And he came, and I was so excited to see him. I gave him a big hug. And he said, Mr. Bose, I'm so happy that you're still here. I came here for 2 reasons. I came here to say I'm sorry for all I put you through as a 6th grader. I was going through a lot in my life at that time, and I just had a really tough time. And I'm here to say thank you, because you did not give up on me. You invested in me. You invested in my mom and my family. And I think about you all the time. It's taken me 5 years to come back to say thank you, but I'm here to say thank you. And for me, that is why I teach, right? That's why I do what I do, because I know that Raphael, whether he becomes a neuroscientist or a teacher or a postal worker or whatever he's going to be, he recognizes that what you do has an impact on other people. And I hope that when he continues that work, whatever he does, he'll continue to have the impact that he had, that I had on him and that he had on me.
Absolutely. So audience members, in a second, I'm going to ask you all to thank our panelists with a round of applause. But I just want to first say that there are teachers on this panel with huge intention, because at the center of this website and this campaign is the belief that teachers do make more, and teachers are going to be a critical part of our 21st century learning and the future of this country. So please, please give a warm round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.